Well, commercially, it's VR. Everyone's just getting into VR. But I think it's now got to the level of realism and high enough resolution, and the headsets are that much better, and the gyroscopic on the iPad and all that kind of stuff, that it's now not just possible, but accessible to the sort of general public. Particularly in the United States, it's become necessary, and expected. It's no longer, right, you have your stills and your printed brochure. Some developments over there are hardly having a printed brochure. It's all immersive content and interactive content, and if you can't click on the screen on an image, it's a bit of a disappointment. Or if you're looking at an image on a screen and the trees aren't flapping around, you're like, is it jammed? Maybe the internet's too slow or something.
As many other companies are doing, we've been getting into VR quite a lot recently. We started by getting an Oculus headset and trying out Unreal, but we're really a bit disappointed by that, because everything we try and do has to be very, very high visual quality, and we felt that the Oculus and Unreal just isn't quite there yet. Next thing we tried was the Gear VR, and the great thing about that is that it's so easy to produce, especially with the steps Corona are making in that direction. So we found that by using the scenes that we already have set up, they actually lend themselves to producing VR, because they're entire 3D environments. So it really is just a case of placing a camera using the stereoscopic Corona camera mod.
Almost every single one of our projects now has a still component, an animated component, and a virtual reality component. I mean, almost all of them, which is great for us because it actually lends itself to our workflow really handily, because we've always, for the last 10 years, we've been working with individually working with 3D environments, full 3D environments, where we build the whole thing and then enter the virtual world as a photographer. So the transition from from the stills to the animation and the VR is natural. There's very little work involved with it, because we already worked in that fashion.
You can actually use it not just as a final product to sell to a client, but you can use it as a development tool as well. So we've been using it recently, even with chalk renders on new projects, where we stick a camera in, render out 360, which really doesn't take long at all, take it into the Gear VR, and then you're fully immersed in that landscape or building, and you can look around, you can see potential compositions that you hadn't thought about before. So it's actually, from initially being maybe quite skeptical about the whole VR movement, we are seeing uses for it. And I think when the Vestry VR tour that we've recently completed, that's actually gone live already, and we hope that will open up a market for us, and it can be something we can offer clients on all our projects in future.
From the artist's perspective, is SketchUp still derided as an inferior piece of software? The answer is yes. Everyone that comes from a sort of more technical modeling 3D background all think of SketchUp as a primitive tool, which it is, but that's the beauty of it.
What we've always felt that is, for the purposes of modeling architecture, I think it's the fastest, most intuitive and most fun program to use to model architecture. I couldn't really even consider using 3D Studio Max or anything to model a piece of architecture. It's different when it comes to furniture or more complex things, but for architecture it just feels second nature. It's just feels really, really easy.
Modeling in SketchUp is a joy. It really is. I know this is something that the industry doesn't want to hear, and it is limiting in that you really can't do anything other than orthogonal geometry. You can, but I wouldn't necessarily advise it. You might as well do that in Max or in another program. But just for basic 2D geometry, it's so fast, it's so intuitive. It's just got a nice feel about it. I mean, it changed the way that architects designed. It really did fundamentally. You know, you can teach my mother to use it in an afternoon. You know, it's so easy that everyone just jumped on it, and architects. I don't know a single architect practicing today that doesn't use SketchUp.
And I think that releasing Corona for SketchUp will be a huge move in the industry, because it's, you know, what SketchUp really needs is a very simple to use render engine, which would allow architects to produce the kind of images they want, they need to produce, without having to get involved in much more complex pieces of software.
And so I think the same jump with something like Corona is going to be super relevant. If architects, all architects use SketchUp, and if they can just plug in a render engine that they can just press go, and show, rather than showing the client just a SketchUp model, they can show them a white card or a clay model. No materials necessarily, just glass and white card. So you get a bit of depth, and you get a bit of GI, and you get a bit of softness, and it's just a game changer. You know, it's there are things on the market that can do that, but you know, V-Ray for SketchUp, but it's not quite intuitive enough for most architects. If it takes them longer than 5 minutes to learn, they're just not interested. We got so many questions. I mean, Peter for years, and me latterly, and then us together have had so many emails and questions saying, how do you do this? How do you do this? In this project, what were the displacement settings on the gravel for this? How did you scatter that? So after many people had come to us and saying, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could have one of your scenes? We thought, well, there's no magic behind these scenes. You can have them. We'll put them out there. And so we rebuilt them, you know, getting rid of any assets that we weren't allowed to use, and then just set up the Boundary store to see if people were interested, and it's been really successful. People have loved it. You know, they've come to us and said more. Whereas as the complexity of the industry and the way that it's, you know, getting broader and broader has gone on, people have to be a bit more open source. People have to share. You know, people do release code. People do release things, and I think Corona were one of the most progressive people doing that, because they released the sort of alpha version that people still use commercially. You know, people still use that because, I mean, Richard Keep uses 3ds Max and Corona alpha version because he doesn't need the full version, because he's just doing white card renders. It was a gateway into the software, super easy to use, and really effective. And he didn't have to make any kind of investment, and it was just perfect. And I think that whole idea of sharing in the industry, that there are no secrets, and the more you share, the more you put out there, the more comes back. I think that's what the Boundary Store is all about. I first heard about Corona through Peter, who loves all the R&D and loves sort of testing new software and things like that. And then I just had a go with it, converted a few scenes over to Corona, had a play with it, seemed to be really good.
With all new technology, for me it's often the seeing really good work that makes you interested, and it was seeing work that Juraj Talčík had been doing with Corona, and chatting to him about it that really got me interested.
Really loved the GI. I don't know how you guys, you know, do it differently from other render engines, but I just loved the kind of softness of light. Everyone mentions it when they first get into Corona. They're like, there's a certain sort of, you know, realism to the light that was just lovely. And
I remember thinking it was so refreshing to see such a simple, stripped back render engine that really made me feel much more creative and almost freer to be experimental and to concentrate on just being artistic. And
then tested it on a commercial project for Bart Square, which Ian Banks was involved with, who's now at Recent Spaces founder, and it was just a great experience. Even an early alpha version worked really well, so we just used it for that, and we haven't looked back. We've worked with lots of different render engines. I mean, principally V-Ray, because it became an industry standard some years ago now. And I think certainly for architectural visualization in our sphere, Corona has largely taken over now, and it's simply because it's easier and the results are better. I mean, it's as simple as that. It really is as simple as that.
Well, we're at the moment in the studio, we're pretty much fully Corona in every project. When we did the VR project over Christmas, then I was badgering Andrea to add some kind of stereoscopic capability, which he did, which meant we could use Corona for that, as well as the things we've the accessibility and the simplicity of use. It's also great having contact with the guys that make Corona, so that we can give feedback and we can say, we really want you to push in this particular direction, or here's something that doesn't work. Can we figure out a better way to do that? So having good communication with the team that are actually behind it is very important. I know that a lot of people have perhaps found that moving from some kind of irradiance map solution to Corona might seem like everything is much slower. But for us, moving to Corona, everything felt faster because we had been doing things brute force anyway. So it actually felt like we could spend a lot less time rendering compared to how we worked previously. And then recently, as Corona has matured, the addition of interactive rendering really has, for everyone here in the office, I think, has meant that you get, I don't know, it's so much more fun seeing instant feedback, and it actually feels like this is where we have all wanted the technology to be for quite a few years now. Most guys in the office here have at least 2 monitors, and we tend to just have one monitor for interactive the whole time while we're working away. Sometimes you see a composition that you otherwise may have missed, or if you're just switched to perspective mode, you see your model from an unexpected angle, and you very often have to save it out as an image because it looks so cool. So it's kind of brings a lot of joy into rendering again.
It's faster. The interactive rendering is just brilliant. That's certainly changed the way that I sort of set scenes up and set lighting up. Being able to just spin around a scene and turn lights on and off and have proper feedback in the same way that some of the real-time engines were supposed to do 5-6 years ago. I've never really had satisfactory results on large-scale architectural projects. Fine on the little, if you're doing product design and stuff like that, but if you've got large-scale, forest-packed landscapes with buildings and complexity, Corona Interactive is the first render engine that I've actually been able to use as a proper working tool that updates fast enough that it's satisfactory, and you don't want to rip your head off with frustration.
The preview in the material editor means when you're working on a material, you get instant feedback, so you can actually understand how a material is going to work. You don't need to have many years of experience of making materials to kind of take that mental leap to know how it's going to render. In Corona, it feels like when you see it there, that's what it's going to look like. So that's much easier. Also, just the lack of settings means that, okay, you maybe can't tweak things and get every last little bit of speed out of your scene, but for me, one of the biggest benefits is that you don't accidentally change a setting and end up with a broken scene, which used to happen a lot, especially for animation. When you're submitting an animation, you've got so many things to think about, so many things you need to tick off. Have I done this? Have I done this? With Corona having so so few options, it means that you don't have that same level of complexity, and not so many things can go wrong.
Certainly my main ambition for the studio, and I know that Peter's very similar, is just quality above everything else. Do the best work that we can possibly do.
My ambitions for the future are to continue to grow the boundary, and so that we can do the same exciting, high-quality jobs that we're working on.
The guys that are here, in my opinion, are some of the best people in the industry, and they're all, good friends as well. And we're such a sort of tight team that just makes it so creative and so fun. That we don't want to lose the essence of that.
Hopefully, I can start to devote a bit more time again to R&D, which feels like what should be my role in the company.
We don't want to sort of say, oh, we'll just take on, another 10 people, which we could if we just took on more work, but it becomes something different. As soon as it becomes too commercial, too corporate, you sort of lose that creative edge. Yeah, well, all the renders I do are for fun. I wouldn't do it otherwise. I'd do something else. And that's a great privilege of what we're doing with the Boundary. It's just fun.
Every render we do, we get a lot of fun out of. Personally, sometimes because we have this a dynamic, fun office place to work in, I think it's a lot of fun to test things and do R&D, try out new features of Corona. So a lot of the time, the fun renders really are when we're actually showing each other in the office what we've discovered or what we can do with the technology. So for me, that's the most fun part.
Do I do anything that is just purely for fun, that isn't in any way commercial? I do. In terms of, I quite like to render up some of my previous designs as an architect. Like, well, I never got to build this, but maybe I'll render it up, which is, Staith End and the Carey House, which are the two scenes on the shop. I basically rendered them up for fun. Second choice for a career, professional windsurfer. That's what I was going to be when I was 11. Didn't work out for one reason or another. You're not supposed to laugh.
I went through a phase of being really heavily into photography, and I think one of the things I love about my job at the moment is making still images, and thinking about composition and lighting, just translating the 3D world into an image where you really consider everything about the image. Lighting is perfect and composition is perfect. So photography would feel like quite a natural thing for me to do that I would love doing.
Now, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'll necessarily be an architectural visualizer forever, because I'm not an architect forever, not an architectural visualizer forever, but it's all within the lineage of the same discipline. So I think I'll be involved in creativity and artistic endeavor and architecture forever, but how that's going to change in the future, I don't know. And it's guys like you that are going to generate new ways of expressing our artistic endeavor that are going to make that possible. Well, certainly in architectural visualization, I think the most important thing is understanding the subject matter. If you don't understand anything about architecture, then how can you start to represent it in any way, be it with a pencil or with a computer or anything?
Understanding architecture, of course, being interested in architecture, knowing what's going on at the moment, but also looking into modernism and the different styles of the past couple of hundred years.
The other thing that I would say is architectural photography, because that's what we are. Once we're essentially architectural photographers, certainly in the still side of things. and now more and more cinematographers as well because of the animation and all that kind of stuff. But essentially we're portraying an image of an environment. It doesn't matter that it's in the computer or in the real world. We create the environment in 3D, and then we go in and take pictures of it with a virtual camera. So to understand architectural photography is absolutely fundamental as well.
The kind of key important things are maybe doing architectural visualization. You need to really understand light and photographic things like composition, and you actually need to get yourself like a manual SLR and really understand how photography works and start understanding what f-stops are and shutter speed, focal length, because it's incredible the number of emails I get from people asking, how do I make my scene brighter? You know, using, perhaps being confused by how the V-Ray physical camera worked or the Corona camera modifier, not really understanding that when you change an f-stop from 2.8 to 4, that has an impact on the image. I would recommend that they actually do that and go out and take photographs, because essentially what we're doing is taking photographs just in a virtual world.
I very rarely get stressed at work, because if we're getting stressed, we just don't take on more work. You know, it's not a case of we've got economic deadlines and, you know, our cash flow is fine. We don't, you know, the only reason to have people slogging away and having these crazy deadlines and working all night is financial. I can't see any other reason why you'd do it. You know, why not just take on one less project, and everyone has a bit more breathing space, you know? And I think that's absolutely fundamental to, well, a fun creative studio, and also fundamental to everyone continuing with R&D and to continuing to test things, as we were talking about. Having that space to be able to do it. And if you're constantly up against a deadline, you're never going to have that time to test new plugins or new bits of software. There's that, and there's also the fact that I've come from the architectural profession. This industry, all we do is draw pictures. I mean, it doesn't need to be stressful. If you're working as an architect and you're designing buildings that could, you know, fail or kill people or have, you know, implications on a waterproofing detail that you got wrong or didn't coordinate with the engineer correctly, and it's cost someone 100 million, you know, pounds, and it ends up in court and all that kind of stuff. And the liability that rests on your shoulders as an architect is pretty formidable, and that can be pretty stressful. Whereas all we're doing is drawing pictures. How can that be stressful?